You probably would have used a for off loop or encountered a use statement in JavaScript. But do you know how it works under the hood? So in this video, I'll be going over iterators, iteratable, and generators in JavaScript. And I'll also be showing you how to build something custom that you can use with a for loop or for off loop statement. So without wasting much time, let's get into it. So right here in VS Code, I have this counter objects, or I'm trying to create a custom counter that I want to use with my for off loop. So to do so, I have to actually do two things. I have to make this object an iterator, or I have to make it obey the iterator pattern, and I also have to make the object an iteratable. So going for the first one, I have to make it an iterator. So to make an object an iterator, the object has to implement the next method. So it has to implement the next method, and that next method has to return another object that have certain special properties, and one of them is the value property. And this can be any value ranging from an object to a string, or probably a number. I'm just going to use a number here, 0, and then it's supposed to have a done property. This is actually a boolean flag that can be true or false. So I'm just going to make it false right here. So what happens behind the scene is that the loop is going to try and call the next method on this counter on every cycle. So let's say this is the first cycle. It's going to call the next method, and then based on the value that is returned by this next method, the loop will either go ahead to call it again for the second time, like in the second cycle, or it's just going to terminate. So if the done flag is true, it's going to terminate. The loop is going to terminate, because this is just like telling you we are done with iteration. You should no longer iterate. You should terminate the iteration. But if the done flag is false, the loop goes ahead to assess the value. So to actually visualize this, I'm just going to try and finish up the counter object. So to do so, I'm going to add a count property of perhaps 0, and then for every iteration, or for every call to next, I want to increment that count variable. So I want to do this dot count. I want to increment it plus plus, so we get a different value for every cycle or every iteration. So what the loop does is that it calls the next method the first time, the first cycle, and it calls it the second time in the second cycle until this evaluates to true, and then it stops the iteration. So if I go over and I do it, I do this in my terminal, I try to execute this, you can see what's happening right here. We have the value of 0, 1, and 2, and this is just how it works. This is just how it works. But there's a caveat to this. If I try to use this right now in my for off loop, I try to do a const value of counter, and then I try to console.log the value. If I try to do this and I try to run this code, I'm just going to clear the terminal again, and I try to run this code, I'm going to get an error. Counter is not an iteratable. So even though it's an iterator, we've given it a way to get the next value. We also need to make it an iteratable. We need to make this object an iteratable for us to use it in this for off loop. So to make this an iteratable, we have to implement the symbol.iterator method. So the symbol.iterator method on this object, and this symbol.iterator method must return an iterator. So to make this object an iteratable, we are implementing the symbol.iterator method, and this method must in turn return an iterator. So we are going to return this. Why? Because this object itself is an iterator. Remember, for an object to be an iterator, it has to implement the next method. So we are going to return this, and when we do this, there's a bug in this code though, but I'm just going to run it. It's going to work. So but there's a bug, and we're going to spot it right away. When we do this, we have a forever loop, and this is because the done property here is always false. It's always false. So this is what is actually happening behind the scene. For every cycle, the loop is doing something like this. It's just going to try and get or call the next method, and then it's going to check if it is not done, like that is, if done is false, it's going to now console.log wherever the value is actually. So this is just the algorithm, or this is what is happening behind the scene. So right here, to solve this, let me get rid of this. To solve this, we have to write an expression right here. We have to create an expression, and I'm just going to say this dot count greater than 5. So what is going to happen is that when count is greater than 5, this is going to result to true, or this is part of the code will be true. To evaluate to true, the expression will evaluate to true, and then our loop will be able to break, or our loop will be broken. So what is going to happen right here is that if we want to visualize this again, let's use console.log, or leave the console.log. Let's just visualize what's happening. On the first run, or on the first cycle, count is 0, count is incremented by 1. So this value is incremented by 1, and then we are going to check if 1 is greater than 5. So 1 is not greater than 5. It's going to happen again. Count to be 1 on the next loop, and then we'll try again to increment it, and then we'll check if 2 is greater than 5. So when it gets to a number that is greater than 5, this will actually break the loop by making this true. So that's how we are going to do something like that. So let me clear the screen. So if I try to run this, you're going to see that we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that is how it works. So with that said, I would like to go over to generators. This is just how to make an object, an iterator, and how to use it in your for of loop statement. This is not the only way, but I would also like to show you a problem with this. Let's say, for instance, I duplicate this code over here, and you are going to expect that after calling it here, we have 0 to 4, and we try to do same here, we are also going to have 0 to 4. But that is not the case, because as you can remember, in JavaScript, this is an object and this is a constant reference. That means this acts as a state, and this value, once it gets to 5, it has gotten to 5, or once it has gotten to 6, it has gotten to 6, and 6 is greater than 5. So this expression will always be true. So if I try to do this, if I try to run this code, let me try to run it. You're going to get 0 to 4 only once. You're not going to get it twice. Why? Because once it gets to 5, once this loop has finished running, this value is already greater than 5 at this point, and trying to access this will always be true, and then this loop will not be able to run. So to solve this, we can use generators. To create a generator, you have to use the function syntax, and then you have to put an asterisk in front of it. Then you call or name the function whatever name you want to name it. I'm going to call it my gen, and then you have to use the yield. Now this is where it's special. Inside the generator function, you have to yield a value. So I'm just going to yield 1 for right now, and this generator function returns an iterator. So it returns an iterator. We can actually use this in our for loop or our for of loop. So I'm just going to try and use it right now. Let me go ahead and use it. I'm going to comment that out, and we're going to try and run this by calling my gen. So for each cycle, the generator is going to either yield a value or is going to hit the return statement. So if I'm to do multiple yield statements right here, let me just do yield 1 and yield 2. What is going to happen is that on the first cycle, this generator will yield 1, and then execution is going to be paused. That is one thing that is special. Execution is going to be paused. It's going to yield 1. That value is what we are going to consume inside this code block right here, inside our for loop code block. And then in the second cycle, it's going to yield 2, and execution is going to be paused. So the first time the execution was paused right here, and we resumed right here, like where my cursor is, we resumed right there, and then it yielded 2. So on the next iteration after yielding 2, it's going to hit the invisible return statement. So what this return statement is actually doing is that it's telling the loop, hey, we are done executing. Once it hits the return statement, the iteration is going to stop. So the loop is going to know that, hey, we have stopped yielding values, so we are going to stop iterating. So that is just what is happening. So to recreate our counter with using this method, I'm just going to go ahead to make a count variable right here and call it make it equal to 0, and then I'm going to write a while loop, and I'm going to say y count is less than 5. We want to yield count, and then we want to do count plus plus. So we want to do count plus plus. So what is actually happening here is that at the first iteration, like during the first cycle, we are going to say count is equals to 0, and then we're going to check if count is less than 5. We are going to yield count. So at this point, it gives back 0, and then it pauses execution. So on the next iteration, it's going to resume from where it pauses execution by increasing the count, and then going back, after incrementing the count, it's still going to check again. Is count less than 5? No, right now it's 1, so we yield again. So if we do this and we try to execute, let me go ahead and execute. You see that it works the same. And for me to prove this to you, I'm just going to use the method, like the method I used to show you how the for off loop works. I'm just going to try to access the next method. So what I'm just going to do is that I'm just going to do this right here, just like the way I demonstrated before, trying to access the next method. So I'm just going to do this, and then I'm going to console.log. So I'm just going to console.log. I'm just going to copy this. I'll copy this to show you how it works. So I'll copy this, I'll put it here, and I'll say yielding. Didn't spell yielding well. I'm just going to say yielding, and then I'm just going to do this right here, and I'll say incrementing. I don't care if I spell it well. Incrementing time is already fast spent. So I'm just going to do iter.next. So I'll do iter.next, and you're going to see what is going to be returned. And then I'm just going to do again console.log. So I've already copied console.log. So let me go ahead and just put some gibberish right here, and just say here, and then I do it again, console.log iter.next. So you can see what is actually happening. So let me clear out my terminal, and then I run this. So you can see what is happening. It first of all says yielding. So it yields 0 with done false, and then it says here. So if you see what is happening, it yields here and it pauses execution right here. So and then we move to the next line, which is here. So you see that this comes before the next console.log, which is incrementing. So it doesn't start here again. So you understand how these things work. It starts here, it resumes here. So it comes to this part that says incrementing, and then it increments the count, and then we check the condition and do this all over again. So that is why we have the result just like this. I hope I've been able to explain to some level what I understand and help you understand how to work with iterators, generators, and iteratables in JavaScript. Well, please like my video, subscribe to my channel. This encourages me so much, and also share my video if you find it helpful. See you next time. Cheers.